Welcome back to Educational Warfare. I'm Dr. Jordan Lauer alongside my co-host, the one and only Dr. Ryan Jackson. As always, a huge shout out to our great team, our generals of video, audio, and direction magic, Tommy Ruth and Matt Paff. What's up, gentlemen? How y'all doing today? I really hope this episode doesn't get banned just because of what we're talking about today. What do you think, Ryan?
Nice little pun there. Yeah, I'm excited about this one because I think it's something that speaks to something that's going on. Every educator in this country is feeling this particular crunch right now, dude. We are talking about banning books. We're talking about banning curriculum or adapting curriculum to potentially meet certain agendas. It's going to get interesting today, man. Deep dive, if I understand correctly.
We're going to deep dive of all this, where it came from, what's happening now, and how it could affect us in the future. So a huge deep dive. But first, before we get into it, let's make sure to follow us on all of our socials. We're at EDU Warfare on X. We're on Blue Sky at Dr. Jordan Lauer. And don't forget, you can now watch us full episodes on Spotify and YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Educational Warfare. Come check it out. We're posting videos. We're posting shorts of the videos. Might do some mini pods if we see something pop up. So follow the channel, because that's where you can catch everything that's happening in the Educational Warfare universe. Subscribe, hit that like button so you can catch everything we do. And don't forget, please email the show if you have any questions, comments, strategies. If you just want to vent a little bit about this, please do at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. And like Dr. Jackson said, the episode's topic is a heavy one. We're focusing on the curriculum wars, book banning, and who decides what students learn. So, what's up, Ryan? I mean, what do you think about this before we really jump into it? Your initial thoughts?
Yeah, man, this is a good one. And I think I'm really going to try to stand in here as maybe the voice of reason. I've certainly been on the side of the administrator who is trying to work with a teacher who may begin feeling those pressures of, can I teach this? Is this still okay? But then I also feel like I lean more sometimes on the side of, just how outright oppressive is this? I mean, is it really being trickled down to the point of, no, you can't do that, and if you do, I'm coming for you? So I'm hoping we can unpack that today, man. We're looking for some truth in here, what's actually going on. I think you've even got some notes on Project 2025, which I think people will find very interesting. But then also some of the anecdotal pieces that we know there are literal books being banned in certain counties, certain states. I mean, these things are happening. So let's dig into it, man.
Yeah, so we're going to go into first, the rise of book bans and curriculum restrictions. How did this come about? Like always, we're going to bring this to you with that radical candor, with that truth. It's a spicy topic, right? So you may have certain feelings about this. Love to hear them. Again, at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. Let us know. So by book bans, right? By book bans and these curriculum wars we're talking about, we're referring to the removal of restriction of certain books from school libraries, classrooms, or the curriculum due to its content, right? So this is why we're banning it. What's inside the books.
You're defining that for us right now.
Just
so
like that's
what is happening? They're banning books. What does that mean?
Right. And why are they being banned? Well, often these books have the alleged inappropriate books and curriculum often have some type of topic covering either race, gender, identity, sexuality, or we're even talking in some points debates about historical accuracy. Like, what do we want to know about history? What should we know about history, and those type of things. So, for who's decided what students learn, we have to talk about this first. And like items like CRT, remember that? That was a big deal.
Man, CRT was hot for a minute.
It was,
right?
Those
critical race theory.
Right, yeah. And you talk about
that was an acronym.
Right, it was. Historical discussions of systematic inequality or injustices. And one thing that's in there, we're getting to this area where a lot of these bans focus specifically or starting to target the LGBTQ plus community and like their involvement in schools, and like how do we work with that segment of people, and how do we make them feel seen, but then also make sure other students aren't thinking about it. So that's a big hot topic. So but censorship in education is not really a new thing in the U.S. It's really, and I always tell my students this when we're talking, about history and things. It's really easy to kind of think that what we're dealing with now is the only time that's happened. They're like, oh, it's a new thing. Oh, this is awful. This must be the first time. But there's been book bans and things forever. I mean, going back here in Tennessee, like Lincoln, something happened. The Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Right, that's a huge thing we teach in
man,
class.
you just went from 2025
exactly
to 19. Was that intentional, man? Like
well,
you literally went back 100 years
ago. It's a 100-year anniversary this year.
Yeah, and I love your point on that. And you always say, or you've said a few times, that history rhymes. So, of course, we've went through this at some point, and now you're taking us back to 1925. And what was that trial called?
The Scopes monkey trial.
Okay.
So in this trial, just give a little background of like a big trial at the time of what do we teach. So this is fighting over teaching evolution in the state of Tennessee. So there was a thing called the Butler Act, which actually made teaching evolution illegal.
Okay.
So his high school teacher taught evolution, and he was obviously charged against the Butler Act, and the ACLU came up to help him, and the prosecuting attorney was the former presidential candidate, very famous for everything he did, William Jennings Bryan. You remember that name? Is that a name from the past?
It does.
He gave a very famous speech in 1896 called the Cross of Gold speech. It's a great speech, but he's the lawyer. So this is a high-profile guy who ran for president several times, being the prosecuting attorney. And the ACLU basically knew that they would lose, but they wanted it publicized.
Well, they wanted it to lose, so they hired him as their prosecuting attorney.
The ACLU was defending Scopes, so ACLU or the prosecutors had William Jennings Bryan, but the ACLU knew they would lose. But the whole point of that trial was actually to get this out there,
sensationalism
into the public,
right,
to let people know this is happening, this is being banned. So it starts there. Then let's jump forward about 25 years. To the 50s, and we have McCarthy-era censorship.
Oh, man, of course.
Right.
The blacklist.
Right. At that time, some books were deemed un-American.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually teaching this in class right now. We talk about the House, the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. Kind of crazy to think we actually had like an un-American committee. Like, oh, that's not American.
Hey, but McCarthy's story is sad, bro, the way that ends.
It really is. Like, he was on top of the world, and then everybody quickly was like,
the way it ends.
Like this.
Anybody do your due diligence on that dude, McCarthy, man, the way his story ends versus where he is at the height of this power, man, where he's literally, just pulverizing people, casting them out. I think of that guy. He ended up making a movie called Rafifi, which is this great heist film. But anyway, he's a blacklisted writer, has to end up going overseas to Europe, to make movies. He ends up making some of his best stuff over there. Julian Sands maybe is the guy's name. But, man, it's just that McCarthy-era 50s. Hollywood was just crushed under that weight. They were going after
Hollywood, yeah. Big thing to try to get them. And that's where you start, so there we're looking at why we mentioned that. So that's not exactly in classrooms, but there's this idea that we're looking at Hollywood. We're starting to censor art. We're starting to censor what people are taking in. And obviously that filters down to what are people most protective of? Their children. So it's going to filter down. So we have that in the 50s where we're looking at that. Then we go to the civil rights era, right? 1960s to present. We have books like To Kill a Mockingbird. Has always been one of those books that's listed because it talks about the social injustice and race issues. Then you have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison was challenged and being for addressing, again, social justice and racism. And now, all right, so let's look at right now.
Yeah.
We have a book that's being banned right now, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and the graphic novel Mouse, which is about...
This is a powerful one, man.
Right.
The Holocaust.
About the Holocaust, yeah. So, and you might say, why are some people, banning that? Why are they banning The Handmaid's Tale? And we'll get into that. Is it fear of what they could learn, or is there actually something, scary in there that they don't want kids to know? And we're banning books that cover LGBTQ issues. They're challenged and banned because you have some, the big issue with that is for the LGBTQ plus books and whatnot is it's the age, right? It's you have this debate of representation, right? Is it important that there may be a child who falls into that, that they want to see something that makes them feel like, oh, that's me. That's the whole point. We see this in Hollywood, right? Representation of like, like superheroes. Like we're starting to like I want a superhero that looks like me. Yeah. And there hasn't been for years for a lot of these groups. And same thing here, but those issues there at what age, like that's where we're getting. Like some parents are uncomfortable with it of like possibly a kid could read that at a certain age. And it's so tough because it's such a emotional thing. I mean, it's anything with parents and kids.
Because you get in, you dip your toe into the awareness argument too, or exposure. So it's one thing, representation. Sure, right. I want to see myself reflected. I want to be represented in these stories. And then I think you're also going to get this other argument right, but you're exposing people, young people, to something way earlier potentially than they normally would at a very impressionable time. So I guess, especially as you start to get into, things that just aren't as visible. So LGBTQ orientation status versus people of color. Right. Okay. And are you planting seeds versus holding up a mirror, and I just think that's where that chasm starts. Exactly. That crack starts.
Yeah, and that is the whole point is, holding up a mirror, letting us see, or planting seeds, as you said it, which is a great way of saying it. Then you're getting into the intention of the author, and that's murky waters, because art is art, and again, I always tell my students, AP European history, a big part of that class is art, and a lot of kids are like, why are we looking at art? Like, why are we talking about pictures and stuff, paintings? Well, art, obviously at the time there wasn't news, so that's how people showed how they felt, and art reflects what you're going through. In times of peace, it's romantic type art and beautiful, like here's our city, here's our town, here's a couple that's pushing each other on the swing. Times of war, dark, so you can legit see what's happening in a time period by the art they produce. And in modern times, we have many more ways to share that, but it's still the same thing with books and everything. This author, did they feel this? Do they want kids to know that they're seeing, or are there nefarious?
I love that you brought up the word art specifically. Right. I had a great quote by Ben Affleck, of all people, recently.
Affleck.
Of all people, man, where he was talking about AI and entertainment, movies specifically, writing. And he gets into craftsmanship versus artistry. Craftsmanship, how to do something. How to do it well. Artistry, when to stop. I just love that, man. It was really profound, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So it made me think of him and his quote. But, back to your thing about, all right, if this is art and the artist, the writer, okay, then education, specifically teachers, committees that choose what art will be implemented into the class. So my question to you would have been, what is education then in this relationship? So if there's the artists, educators are what, the curators?
That's a great question.
And I'm asking for a reason, because you're talking about, well, you got to start, ascertaining what their meaning is, or what is the full message behind this, if it's clear, and then does that become the curator's role to do that work? Right. The artist's role is say, hey, man, this is just up for interpretation.
Yeah.
But you, as the curator, you figure it out, what it means and how it can impact.
And I think where you get there, I think where teachers, educators get really upset with this or feel odd is that it kind of naturally goes to this negative route that, they'll just not do any of that curating or vetting. Like when you think of a museum, let's break down the word curator. What's their job? To look at the pieces of art, to put them together in a way that makes sense, that makes your museum or your show kind of flow. And that's exactly what teachers do. And there's just this feeling that we'd be out here being like, oh, here's this. Oh, you're like,
okay. And I want to double down on that too. And this goes back to, my experiences as an administrator, as a principal, and also as a teacher, though. So we are, as employees of a school system that fall under the umbrella of the state, we are agents of the state.
Yes.
We work in the system. We're vetted through the system. We maintain our certifications through the system.
Right.
So I find it just interesting, sometimes hypocritical, sometimes just outright confusing. The state, or Big Brother, if you want to call it, is concerned about its own people, its own agents, going rogue in the field,
doing whatever they want,
and just pushing out whatever curriculum books that they want, almost seemingly forgetting that, I mean, we're agents of the state. Like we work in this system for you. And that, I think, gets to this deeper rooted, whatever that is, of we just don't trust our own agents. I mean, we don't trust our own people.
That's where teachers get upset, because it's like, why are you looking at me?
You don't. And I think they have a valid argument
Right.
there. It's like, you don't trust me? If you don't trust me, why am I being put through all of these certification hoops
Right.
annually? And I mean, principals go through it too. I mean, we take these things to get vetted so we can,
Right.
evaluate teachers and stuff like that. But teachers go through all this, that, and more. What are your points called? You've got to add up, I know, certain points that you get.
So, I mean, we have the observation, we have the professional
Development,
points,
PDP points.
Yeah,
I mean,
PDP
you've got to do all these things. I'm giving you painstaking details in the life of an educator, because they have to jump through these hoops to be vetted and certified by the state.
Yeah.
The same people who are then turning around and saying, we may not trust what you're bringing into the classroom on your own free will.
Yeah.
Is that how you're kind of feeling as an educator?
Yeah, and I think that's an awesome point there, is that, non-educators, they may feel that, it's kind of like another job. Like, you get your degree or your whatever you need to go into that field, and then all of a sudden you got the job. And for a lot of jobs, like, you can you can go through some training and whatnot, but for most jobs, let's say you're sitting in a cubicle, right? You get the job. You may have something, if something changes in the company, you might have to go to training, but you kind of have that job until you move or you don't. Where, like, and maybe they think that's for teachers, like, they went to college, they got hired by some principal, I don't know who that principal is, so I don't even know if I trust the principal, and then they're just there. It's like, no, we constantly have to keep updating and proving and improving and being vetted.
Stay sharp.
Yeah,
my wife just went through the one on AI, and she's
Right.
like, it was intense, pretty good depth to it, and gave us even some history that she wasn't aware of at that time. So, constantly keeping you sharp, sharpening that saw. We're going through these processes.
Yeah, you don't just get hired off the street as a teacher.
And then that's
you have
it.
to keep proving it. I think some people think that when these type of things come up, like, what are these people showing our kids? Who are they? It's like, we're people who, up until this point, the state has said, you're here. Great job.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about this, before we get into it, some people might ask, okay, there's book banning, there's curriculum things. How does that happen in the land of the free, where we live? In the land of the free, with the First Amendment of our Bill of Rights being free, the freedom of speech and expression, how is banning anything legal? And it all starts with, like, the thing where this all gets drawn from is a Supreme Court case in 1982. Okay, so the Supreme Court basically issued, in the case Island Trees Union Free School District, that's a mouthful, versus Pico, 1982, they did a non-committal ruling. So it basically didn't say yes or no. They just said, Supreme Court tries to set up precedent, obviously, and they basically said, we're not committal, or we're not committed to this, we're being non-committal, to where we'll look at this almost case by case, or depending. And what they said was, local school boards have broad discretion in the management of school affairs.
Okay.
And that discretion must be, quoting them, must be exercised in a manner that comports with the transcendent imperatives of the First Amendment. So a couple things there, if you're looking at that, where this gets in the weeds, why we're in this issue, is that the Supreme Court did not want to make a blanket, hey, we're setting curricular ideas for the whole nation. That's why they're non-committal. But where it gets kind of funky here is the school boards, the local school boards have that discretion. And that's where you get to it. Because our country's so big that, a school board in Connecticut most likely has super different views on something than a school board in southwestern Texas.
Safe to say.
Yes. So that's where we get into this. So it's that Supreme Court case that really kind of sets this. And then,
which sets it in terms of empowering local school boards to say yes or no on, we're teaching this or we're teaching that. And just for, I think, to kind of wrangle it in a little bit, I mean, somebody has to manage it, ultimately.
Yeah, and I'm not saying local school boards having is a bad thing.
Yeah, it can't just be willy-nilly, but the Supreme Court is saying, we're not going to be the one that imposes that. We're instead going to empower hyper-local agencies, i.e. school boards, to make those kind of decisions on what's best for their communities.
Right. And but when you open that up, and again, local school boards, they have their finger on the pulse of their area. That's why they exist, which I think is a good thing, because when you start getting large state school boards running just things.
Right. These local school boards are voted on by their constituents within zip codes. Mm-hmm. So you think we're picking the people that best represent us on a hyper local level.
The problem with that is when you have those groups, best intentions laying in their heart, now you can have various outside groups lobbying and influencing.
Okay.
So you'll start to see this scattershot of that's why all over the country certain things are banned here, but they're not banned here. And that's where it starts to get a little bit shaky. So some recent trends. Let's go into so we're talking about book banning. You might be sitting there going, okay, how big of an issue is this? They banned Mouse. Okay. They've been talking about banning all the books that deal with race and social issues, To Kill a Mockingbird. So let's get some actual things. So from 2023 to 2024, over 10,046 books have been banned, covering 21 states and 66 school districts.
That seems significant.
Yeah, according to Statista.com. So that's 10,046 books banned. And one of the issues here too is, when you have all of these, like the various books, is it worth fighting? And that's where this becomes an issue, because if somebody says we should ban this book for reason X, okay, now they're looking into it. Like now the school, okay, should we? But then somebody else says we should ban this book. It becomes, they just get a barrage of this. So do you just, if so many people are angry about it, do you just cave? Or do you put up the fight for that book and the next book? And that's
let me ask this question. And I think it's valid. And I don't mean it to be silly. I don't. Talk to me about, from current teacher lens in the classroom, and I know you deal primarily with high school students, but I think that's the appropriate age group for this particular question.
Right.
Talk to me about, man, kind of the lunacy of, in this era where kids aren't excited about reading, period, reading books. And I'm talking long form novels, nonfiction, in-depth, Truman Capote style, just, they're not doing that.
No.
Man. But by and large, they're not doing that. So, man, it's just hard for me from this outside perspective looking in. We're going to double down on this book banning deal when kids aren't really that excited about. So it brings up this question for me, like, is this just the death knell for books? Like, all right, they're already not reading them that much. They're on shaky legs. Man, let's just, KO punch. Just Mike Tyson, NES, punch out round one, just one uppercut, and it's over for books. Or is it something else, man? Because I'm just not seeing why we would put this much energy and effort into something when it feels like books as a medium are already on shaky ground for young people. Yeah, help me understand that, man.
It's crazy to me because the same people, right? The same, like when you look at these groups, one of their first things they talk about is students aren't achieving enough. Right, they're not getting the same scores. They're not getting good enough scores. They're not doing what we should be doing. And then they say, well, it's because we're not looking into enough content. They're trying to change curriculum. So those same people who say we aren't scoring enough. Why is it always the same people who are banning books are also the same ones complaining that kids don't read enough? Like you just said, maybe stop taking all the books away. Especially the ones that make kids feel something.
Yeah,
and that's what you're saying is, like,
especially in this critical time in their life where you go from, what is it, third to fourth to fifth, where you go from learning to read or learning how to read to then learning to read for content.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty, those couple years there, significant.
Super important.
I'm just learning how to read. And then I would almost say, man, this growing number of kids that struggle to read, and not motivation, I mean, literally struggle. So then we have to do this extra work of, man, I know this is a struggle, so I want to keep you motivated on this struggle. And that's when we start offering graphic novels, heck, comic books. When I was a teacher, man, it was kind of like get them interested in anything, whatever it is. Get them interested in reading because it was so challenging. And I don't want to be stuck in 2008, dude. I mean, so, pull me all the way up to current times. Is that still a struggle to get kids to read a book?
Yeah, I think it is because of the availability of other things. And again, because like even in, for example, my wife, who's a teacher, was talking about a teacher she's worked with in the past who they have like the English in that area have kind of a set curriculum. It's not like scripted or anything, but it's like, hey, teach this and this and this. And they'd been getting bad scores for a while. So this teacher was like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to teach this novel. Okay. That way the things we need to work on, it's not just like, what's the main point? What's the context of those revolving English?
Standards,
right? Standards and whatnot. So she was like, I'm going to teach this novel to do it. Well, she got a slap on the wrist because the novel wasn't in the curriculum. And I get why that happens in the state level. They said, take that out because you did have some teachers who just love this book and they just sit on it for 2 months to really take part, and they weren't covering a lot of the other standards. So I get why that, but she got in trouble for having them read, break apart, discuss a novel because it wasn't in the standards. And I think that's what we're getting is that we don't have this. And then it's also to what the other alternative is. Are you, as a 11, 12-year-old, going to read a 250-page book, even if it's great, or are you going to consume hundreds of 30-second shorts in a day? That's the thing. It's like
it's back to my I wonder. All right, and this is, I get it, a bit nefarious, and it's purely speculative. This is just, I wonder. So if we know that kids are no longer reading like they used to, whenever that was, but we know they're no longer reading as much for pleasure outside of school, we'll say that. All right, then it's safe to reason the only time they probably do read is when they're captivated here. Compulsory attendance law says you got to be in school, and guess what we're doing at school? We're reading. So anybody who would be against that kind of learning, that kind of representation, that kind of seed planting, wherever you fall on that spectrum, that stance of for or against, that's going to happen in schools.
Yeah. So that's why you get some of these players in here. We'll go over some of like who are these organizations that are kind of driving this. Okay. And that's exactly the point you're making is if you are fearful of what they're learning for whatever your motivations, and I'm not going to pull any punches here. There are some groups out there who just simply don't, because they want to control the narrative about certain things in history. They don't want kids learning about something because and just like you said, if they're doing that on their own, then that is a small amount. If you have a state of classes all learning about this, now you're going to have to change the mind of thousands of people who've looked at this. So a way of banning this, again, to not seem nefarious or conspiratorial here, is the best way to make sure that a message doesn't grow or get embedded that's against what you want is to make sure that in mass people can't study it. So you ban it, right? If you don't want a discussion of social justice, like you kind of want to keep pushing, like, well, then don't have that allowed in classes, because then if 2 kids, 3 kids, 100 kids read that on their own, that's okay. But the whole state having that kind of in their head, so when you do something and they're later like, hold on, like I remember talking about this when I was younger, like this seems opposite of what we talked about, that we talked about this was bad and you have to care about what people are feeling, and now we're saying we don't.
But it still seems, I mean, it's still interesting that they would go for that approach, meaning, right, we're going to ban it during this time when kids are concentrated and they have to be there, and probably the only time they're going to read anything because they're forced to do it. All right. But yet they can still, the kid, vet everything through social media, the internet, AI. I mean, it just still seems kind of risky. It's like, all right, we're going to double down on the banning, the curriculum in something that most kids just
don't care about
at mostly, right? You see where I'm going with this? And they can always pivot over here to see, is this true, or what do my peers think about this? And they're going to get some completely different, far off narrative. But the idea still is catch them in mass.
Right.
This is our this is our stance on this particular historical situation, and the hopes that they internalize that, take that as fact moving forward.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Can you guys maybe define a little bit more specifically what exactly it means to ban a book in education?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you ban a book, right, you're basically saying this book, there's a couple different levels. There's, curricular banning, like, hey, you're not allowed to talk about this. Okay. So that is where, or we're not going to use this book. So, it makes it more difficult. So you take, for example, let's just go with To Kill a Mockingbird, because it's kind of been banned, it's been unbanned, it's been banned. You basically say you cannot, if it's banned, you cannot make lessons out of this. It cannot be an active part of the school curriculum. So that just takes its content out of it. But we're also dealing with,
which means as soon as you do,
yep,
you're going to be held accountable for that. There's going to be punitive punishment.
Yeah, you're getting pulled in the principal's office, like, hey, this is on the banned book list, and
right.
You can be kind of like a revolutionary, like, but it's a great content. I don't agree with it being banned, and then your principal.
It doesn't matter, man. The speed limit says 65.
Right. Like, hey, there's
bro.
a law. Like, I can't not
it
do
is
anything.
What it is, right?
But we're also dealing with, it's a great question, Tommy. Like, we're also dealing with a secondary type ban too, of where we were just talking in mass them learning it, but now we're getting, which is upsetting people a little bit more, is simply having it in the school library, not even being taught.
Yeah,
it exists.
Accessible.
Yes, it's accessibility. Okay, and that's where a lot of people get upset because, again, like nobody wants in America, nobody wants a library with 6 books in it. Because it's like, oh, you can't read that and that and that. And then you get that question of accessibility. What, we have debates over what level is it? Is this for too young? And then again, you get into what are the librarians doing, which we'll go into that a little bit. But basically banning it means the school can't use it, or it can't be used in the library, or in the library for kids to check out. Sometimes you get that it has to be put in a special section, like an older kid section if you have like a multi-grade school. So it's just basically attempting to take it out of the hands of the kids while at school. Okay. The other side says, well, that's the parents' job. Okay. But also, my reaction to that is, I don't know. And if you're out there, God bless you. But I don't know many parents that are taking their kids to bookstores. So most kids chance to see a book.
Mostly rest in peace bookstores.
Right. I know. It's super sad. I love bookstores. Go in there, the smell.
Yeah.
Sit there and just look at books for hours. But, most of these times, like, this is the only time the kid might see that book. Because, like, again, they're not going to be like, oh, we're going to Books A Million.
But hasn't this extended to, like, public libraries?
Yes.
In some cases?
And now it's extending to that because there are kids section in public libraries. So it's just this whole thing of trying to pull these things. So banning it is either curricular or it's just being around accessibility.
Right. We do not want this in my child's library, period, for him or her to stumble upon it, fall into it, and internalize the ideas within it.
I'm going to change them.
Yeah.
So, some of the groups that are kind of behind this, let's talk about these groups because like that, one of the groups is, in the news a lot, hot topic is Project 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they're basically their objective. It's a conservative organization. And Project 2025 proposes, a bunch of changes to public education. They want to reduce federal education funding. Recently, they're talking about completely getting rid of the Department of Education. We talked about that in our educational smackdown episode about Linda McMahon. Will we have it? She could be Secretary of Education if we have a Department of Education.
Yeah,
that's one of their big things is that they're worried about. They want to reduce funding, promoting classroom censorship, like what kids are learning, because their fear is that we're all indoctrinating them, that where you get this idea of the white guilt that all white people are bad and they subjugate, and they're like afraid of that by teaching history and slavery is somehow the hidden message there, or and again expanding book bans. And the way they've done this, the initiative wants to, like I said, get rid of the Department of Education, which also gets rid of some civil right protection for students, and that could have marginalized some communities, especially marginalized people already. So they say we shouldn't indoctrinate kids. Okay, that's like their whole thing, Project 25. But banning books is literally forcing one perspective on people, and that's that's the definition of indoctrination, right? So that's one of the interesting things about that group. They're super controversial, and they're now gaining power. A bunch of the members are being put up within the new administration this year for pretty powerful roles that were all affiliated with this group. Another one is the Great Hearts Academy. Okay, so this is a network of publicly funded charter schools that are mostly located in Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, and they offer a classical education. That's often like a key phrase can be used here. Greek philosophy, Western literature. They do promote critical thinking, but their curriculum is facing criticism because there's social exclusion and some ideological biases. So that's more of a group that's trying to say, hey, we have this curriculum, but when you really kind of tear it down, you're like, some things are missing here. Is that purposeful or what? And then you also have so those are some groups, but then you just have state level legislatures. They proposed or enacted legislation to restrict discussions on topics like critical race theory and LGBTQ plus issues in the classrooms. And so, for example, what do we mean by that? There are laws in Florida, Tennessee, our library law that we can break into, and Texas have been implemented to limit education from addressing these like systematic racism, gender issues.
How much hearing you go through kind of this extensive list here, how much do you think some of this is just keeping the peace at school? And just again, and I wonder, right, where, man, just given the state of things, and let's go there. Violence in schools, active shooters, all of that. Given the state of things, are we really just trying to ensure down to concepts the safest, most sterile, most non-combative classroom possible?
Right. Yeah, just
look.
Just the facts, man.
We don't need any of the sensationalism. We don't need any speculation. We don't want any controversy. We don't want any hurt feelings because it's already tough enough out here.
Right.
We just want smooth sailing.
Yeah, and you could totally get that. Like there is, but again, that goes to the whole teacher kind of advocacy for ourselves, right? Like the teacher advocacy, teacher efficacy, you could say too, that we all know our classrooms. Like no teachers are walking and be like, I'm going to blow up my classroom. It's going to be chaotic. Some chairs might get thrown today. Nobody wants that.
Man, I hear you on that. Again, I'm going to leverage the time in the administrator seat. There are educators who think like that, but that's not the reality.
Totally get it. Yep.
And they go in and they can't manage it. They don't have control over the topic, over the outcomes.
Right.
So we find ourselves, I've been there anecdotally, you find yourselves now having to play, firefighter and putting out certain things, unwanted outcomes from these conversations, from these topics. And you look back in hindsight like, man, wow, that could have been avoided. And I think that's where I'm going with some of that.
Yeah.
Is it like, we just don't have the capacity in certain areas. And mind you, I understand I'm saying this in the same conversation where we said, right, but teachers are vetted, they get put through certifications, they get through all of that. Both things can still be true. You have to go through those processes, and I've still seen it play out in a way that is just, man,
super negatively.
Yeah,
and just
it doesn't.
This wouldn't happen.
Doesn't end well, and it makes you wonder. All right, so are we in here fighting for freedoms, or are we just trying to get through the school day, man?
And I think that's that is an important topic because yes, we have to do that. We have to, number one goal for administrators, teachers, safety of students, safety, happiness of students. Number one goal every single day. So how do you balance that? The problem is when you get into some of this, that either we do go, and I use this term, you hear it in the news a lot, either we kind of go this nice, easy, whitewashed version of things, okay? Or we go in and tackle it. And some issues are prickly. Like history is not pretty. You know, I mean, most things in history are negative.
Yeah.
You know, there are very few things in the history book I'm like, and everybody hugged, smiled, and loved each other. Like, I don't know if I've said that. Like,
Yeah, history's messy, man.
Yeah, history's messy. So if you're talking just history class, okay, if you're talking about social issues, again, messy. Like, how do you teach the civil rights movement without getting a little, you know, your hands a little dirty?
Yeah.
You know, how do you teach the issues of Civil War, slavery, all of these things? Like, there are some issues that have to get a little dirty, and I totally get that you want to protect it, but by protecting and making kind of it nice, smooth sailing, are you doing long-term harm? You know, the whole point of a free public education, which America has, and which I think has helped contribute to the greatness of our society, is that we've educated everybody and we give them this information, is that we don't want people figuring out stuff when they're 22. You know, I don't want a kid to have to Google something at 19 because I was like, I don't want to talk about that. That could be bad. And they just don't know, because everything should be built up in their head as a Rolodex of things that's happened before, so you can assess what's happening right now. That's what I always tell my students. I was like, the reason we study this is so something happens now.
I want to hold you to kind of the same arena that we've been kind of squaring off in, and that's thinking of the teacher. But I'm going to go back to something you said earlier in the episode. You know, the way people view things, feel, or act in Connecticut or Vermont
It's very different.
versus South Texas versus Mississippi versus Georgia, in some regards, going to be vastly different. And I'm just talking teachers here. I'm not even talking legislators. I'm just talking
we're people.
Just people, human beings. So their biases, their perspective, you know, their history is going to be thought of and taught differently geographically, right?
Right.
I mean, we can almost assume that's true. So then not your argument, but the argument for something like the Department of Education comes in as this baseline, this mood stabilizer, right?
Umbrella covering everything.
That we're all going to be here because your point earlier is we're not here.
Yes.
So we need something to get us here. And that too is a rub.
Yeah, it's
because we really want to just be doing what we want to be doing and what we think is right.
Right.
But when there's this other governing body that says, right, but that's not the case. So then we all have to meet in the middle at this thing. And historically, it's like, well, whoever is in control at that time controls that piece.
Right. And that's where you get these outside, these outside parties, like, again, the Project 2025, Moms for Liberty, right? Like that group, it's wonderful. Like if you were to break down how to make a group with a very specific agenda get into things and seem like they don't have it, like they seem like they're doing the right thing, put the word mom in front of it. Moms for Liberty. So everybody all of a sudden is like, oh, well, Moms for Liberty, they have kids. Well, if you look at what they're doing, a lot of it is we want our kids, which are a certain type of child, to not hear about other certain types of children. It can be nefarious, but they sneak in, they come to school board meetings, they kind of get in these areas, they run for school board, and they have this agenda of, I don't want people to know about X because it goes against what I'm thinking. That's the thing that scares me about the Department of Education going away. I don't know exactly what effect it'll have, but I do know that if there's not the overarching umbrella watching over things, then we could have, my fear is that kids in Mississippi, kids in Idaho versus kids in South Carolina, Connecticut, Illinois are learning different things. That is not good for a country. Like, how do you hire those people when they have almost a completely different view of things? And I know that happens regionally with stuff, and I'm not talking like a kind of a biases or this is how I was raised, but literally they didn't hear something that happened.
Yeah.
And that's scary. Like that's scary, because then we just get this weird, I feel that it starts, what you'll start to get is almost like a, tribalism, factionalism.
I hear you on that. I do. And I think of groups like, Daughters of the Confederacy and stuff like that. I hear you on that. I wonder, it goes back to young people, and it just seems like a pretty big leap. It's like, okay, so we're just assuming that kids are showing up every day, excited to learn, can't wait for you to pour into me, and they just retain everything that they got in there that day. When the reality is, it's like a fraction of that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, in my class, that's how it goes. But other teachers, I'm sure it's the fraction, right?
You know, I know we're all going to double down. No, we're learning. We're bell to bell in here.
Right.
Just the idea of kids walking in and being excited about it.
Right.
You know, I'm using your example, man. The kid that walks into Connecticut that may be getting a more progressive education versus the kid that walks in, you know, in Mississippi or South Texas that's getting maybe a hyper-localized, you know, view of things. They're both equally unexcited about what they're going in to learn about that day because they're thinking about, you know, playing Marvel Rivals and, you know, doing this, that, or the third. So I guess, again, it feels like this big double down on something that kids are just like, meh.
Well, and it's literally, I'm trying to think of, there's a movie or something. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I can picture it. It starts at a kid's party or something, and the kids are doing something, and one kid pushes a kid or gets something the other kids didn't, and the parent steps is like, hey, that's not fair, or let's do that. And eventually it turns into the parents having this screaming match, and the kids who it happened to end up sneaking off in the corner and hanging out and playing, and it's the parents fighting. And that's always what this is.
Yeah.
Like, it is a lot of times all of this, the kids are over there like, all right, well, we'll chill until you're all done arguing about this, you know. And you're exactly right. They're not exactly, but
you know,
some are fighting.
To almost counter argue my own question here is, right, since by and large young people do feel like that, someone then has to, in their best interest, and this is where it gets interesting, because now we're talking influence. What is leadership? It's the art of influence. So because I'm indifferent, or because I don't care, right, because I'm apathetic, you know, pick your adjective for a kid,
Right.
We then have to have some other governing body come in and say, right, so we're going to care for you, and here's what that's going to look like. Because, you know, most kid run-of-the-mill, you know, Ryan Jackson at 10, 11, 12 years old, you're banning books. That means I don't have to read any? Sweet.
Right, yeah.
No homework tonight? Right, because all the books got banned. You know, it's just getting there in my mind, but now I can kind of see it. So even if you look at it through, well, kids just aren't that excited about it anyway, then I'm going to be this governing body that comes in and says, right, we'll be the ones that are excited to make these decisions for you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great segue. Let's look at how this affects students. Let's kind of break that down. So, you know, according to Columbia University's Teacher College of Educational Leadership, their professor, Sonia Douglas, she says book bans diminish the quality of education students have access to and restrict their exposure to important perspectives that form the fabric of a culturally pluralistic society like the United States. She goes on to say, it's a battle over the soul of the country in many ways. It's about what we teach young people about our country, what we determine to be the truth, and what we believe should be included in the curriculum they're receiving. There's a lot at stake here. Okay, so that makes me think of, you know, one of the first things I think of when I read that is the opening scene of Braveheart, where Robert the Bruce says, remember, history is written by the victors. And that's kind of what's going, is like, what, and I mean, she even says that, what is, what we determine to be the truth.
You know, and that bit right there makes me think, okay, then if the banning thing continues, or if we just begin this hypercritical piece on anything that may make us feel uncomfortable, fine, then we need some kind of curriculum piece on how do we know what's true?
Right.
How do we implement critical thinking into what we're reading from AI-generated responses to social media videos that we see, you know, ubiquitously every day? I do like that bit in there about, you know, how do we ascertain now, especially now, what is true?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't want to, like, and that's fear, is like changing stuff. Kind of a crazy fact that, you know, obviously throughout the years thinking of this, but I've found this fact. It only takes 2 generations to wipe a fact from kind of memory and history. If you take away the content that covers that, it takes, you know, father, son, by the time grandson of the father is of learning age, if you haven't talked about it, if you've taken away the materials,
gone,
that fact can go away.
Yeah, and then there's the additional stat on that is it takes 3 generations to recover it.
Yeah.
So in this limited, attention economy that we have, once it's gone.
Yeah, I mean,
it's gone. We're not getting it back.
So many, there's enough people who have just a slight grasp of it. So if you take it out, the people who kind of know a lot about it, they'll shout into the wind. Those other people I always thought the same thing. Like until like when I was younger, one of the things that bugged me is like in Star Wars, I was like, it hasn't been that long, and people all like by the time Luke's there, they're like, what are the Jedi? Like Luke thinks they're a myth. And I was like, it wasn't even that long. Your dad was one. And you're 17.
Exactly.
Like, how do you not know? I know he didn't know his dad, but like, just the idea that it's everybody's talking
about
right
when it's taken out of the public consciousness.
Yeah, and then when it's also you take it out, and then you also throw in, well, it didn't really happen like that. It wasn't that way. So you take it away, you take the actual information away, and then you pose it as they were.
And there's to anchor this in real life. There's a in New Zealand, a native language, Te Reo Māori is the language, or the people that speak the language, but the government saw that language as less than, just saw it, think kind of blue collar, white collar United States, right? College bound versus, this vocational track. They just saw that as less than, and systematically began eliminating that from curriculum, from schools. So the language itself was on its last leg of literally people who could speak it. It was a dying language. And it was through these grassroots, hyperlocal efforts to begin teaching the kids to bring that language back. And it's now like regaining steam, but it's taken... and they've, again, had to go to legislation to get them to stop fighting against that. But it was this group of people, an entire language about to be extinct, wiped from the planet.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it came back down to this kind of governmental view of what's good for the people of New Zealand and what's not. And I think of that kind of through these lenses sometimes of, how we're eliminating certain things because this particular group thinks it's not in our best interest.
Yeah, so exactly. So when you have groups doing that, again, it's affecting students. What are they learning? And we talked about earlier, do they really care? Are students just sitting there like, oh yeah, but again, we talked about this when we did our exhaustion episodes, right? Go on, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. The audio is also on YouTube of our first arc over exhaustion, where we talked about indoctrination. We talked about a few of that's exhausting teachers. We'll get that in a second, but for kids to care, they have to feel something. Like that's where you really get it. Like I've seen over the years, you talk about something, you kind of as a teacher, you're like, all right, I'm going to cover this, civil rights. I have to cover lynching, right? That's a hard topic to cover.
For sure.
So I'm sitting there like, okay, I'm going to cover this. And I have kids that are almost like just barely there every day. They're like, all right, I'll be nice. I'll pay attention to you, but I'm putting in the effort just to like get me through the day. Who all of us, they start asking questions. They're just staring at you because they feel something. They feel that. And that's a lot of this content's being taken away is to make them feel that, because when you put empathy in something, it almost makes it impossible to erase. But if you keep that feeling out, then it's opinion. Like I can change, if you don't feel something for that, if I talk to you enough, I can change your opinion, make you not feel it. But if you feel something like actually in your heart, like that makes me feel weird and I don't like it because I feel like it was wrong. No matter what I say, your brain's going to go, no, we felt that. Like through that perspective we look through.
Yeah, and I think you've just almost nailed it though, man, because the rub is in with what you just said, that I can make someone feel a certain way, give me enough time to talk to them. Right, that's influence. What is leadership? It's the art of influence. But if I don't want you influencing my people in that certain way, or I'm concerned of what that influence is, or let's give them just 100% benefit of the doubt. Is what you're saying accurate? Are you representing all the facts correctly?
Right.
I mean, I think that's at a just purely benefit of the doubt level.
Right.
Hey, we want to make sure that that's really what's happening and what's being said is on brand, is accurate, is research based, and man, a lot of times, if it's just left to the devices of the teacher, I think that scares a lot of people.
It does, yeah. And it's you get this to where you don't know, and kids come home and say, my teacher said this. The parent's like, what? And it's like out of context, which is always super scary.
Bro, that happens with how math is taught.
Oh, gosh.
But I wasn't taught that way. And I mean, no. And this is like real life, bro, timely.
Yeah.
Just the varying strategies on how we learned how to do, adding fractions versus how it's taught now. Now you compound that with social issues.
Yeah.
Bro, the word you used was lynching. I mean, that's going to really put people
and I think
on
teachers
edge.
know that. Like, I know that there are certain, like, as and I always, we could shifting into how does this affect educators, right? Fear of losing your job. Like, when I talk about that issue, I have to take you have to basically be like a moderator, right? I'm going to give you this fact or this question. I want to hear what you say, and I'm going to guide it. And you can't really, obviously, there is sides in lynching. Lynching is bad. That's the side I'm always going to take. I'm on it right now. If that's controversial, sorry. Very, very bad. But you can't put your own personal emotion there. You can't put like, oh, it's because these people, it's just that you want them to feel that emotional tug for what happened. When you start putting any personal biases or tying it to something in an incorrect way, that's where you get in trouble. And again, like anything, there are
and
some
I think that's
that.
probably not probably that's I'm sure a great concern is there's the want to, I want to address these things because they're historical and they're important. But then there's the can I. So can you manage it? Can you successfully facilitate that kind of conversation, that kind of lesson that doesn't spiral out of control, that doesn't, bro, I've seen these things turn into arguments in class that turn
absolutely.
physical. I mean, you've got to be able to manage that kind of environment. Not everyone brings that skill set to the table. There's the science and the art of teaching. I've always thought that. The science, scope and sequence, curriculum, here's what I do, protocols, the art, and I'll go back to that Ben Affleck quote, knowing what to leave out, knowing when to stop, right? Hey, the lesson stops here, or the extrapolation of this concept across generations stops here. I mean, knowing when to do that, man, not everybody has that capacity, man, certainly.
It is an art, and I think that is something that I think that type of training is good. The problem is when you're banning this stuff, then you don't, like when you're banning it and saying, hey, you just don't talk about it, or like just cover it briefly, you also don't then get the chance to provide that, like that training.
Man, I love that, because what you're speaking to there makes me think of, and this is not a knock on colleges or, education institutions, but you'll hear people, dude, by and large say, man, they didn't train me for this, they didn't prep me for that, and I think a lot of that is true. Yeah. And, you said that's going to require more training. Now, to compound issues, we're in this new era of we're going to reduce funding, certainly in states like Tennessee, where the voucher bill has just going to impact us nearly $1 billion. That's going to have to be siphoned from somewhere, most likely public education. Dude, the training for that?
Oh, I know.
You're not going to be able to pay for that. This nuanced artistry approach to teaching heavy concepts through an unbiased lens objectively so that people can develop empathy on their own. I mean, man, it's hairy, bro.
It is
hairy.
It is, and it is scary because before I ever do a controversial topic, we cover how to have conversations. Like, I teach that life skill. I'm like, look, when somebody says something, if you disagree, your response can't be that is stupid.
Yeah.
Because what you've just done is you've triggered them, like they're kind of like listening or like ready to argue. You're already starting that way. I was like, we don't do that.
But not every class, dude, is going to have the capacity of a Socratic seminar.
Oh, totally.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off, man.
Oh, I've been in some of the class I've been in.
That's right. And I know there's going to be people listening that are going to say, I can teach this in any school, in any class. And there are those teachers that are that great. But not every person has that capacity, and there's going to be some environments that are not ready for teachers who don't have that capacity to teach something like this in that way. And again, I just go back to the I wonder on some of these things. I think that then opens up the argument for people.
Yeah.
Well, since we know we can't control it across the board, then actually the opposite is better.
Right.
We're just going to make sure that.
Yeah.
Because you really don't have the capacity to do that, man. You think you do, or you might think you do, or some are like, I don't want to, right?
Right, yeah, I
So
don't wanna
instead,
get
we
in
just
there.
take the knee-jerk reaction, and we just pull it out altogether. You don't even have to worry about that. That kind of stuff should be happening at home. Boom.
Yeah, and you know, that is a fear. Like we'd rather be. I think the better route is to take that time to train. And I totally get like you need to know your class. You need to know what you can and can't talk about, ways to do it, because there's very different ways. You could do we're gonna have a conversation. You could do it under like show something and then have you like individually write about it. Like just like what's your thoughts on this. That way it's not really shared. So where you do that type things, and these are just strategies for teachers that you can do. But the fear is, right, like just like working out, right? Like if you want to make your body better, you're going to go through a little pain, right?
Right.
Education's pain. Like if we want to be better as a society, we're going to have to go through a little pain, and that is part of it. And that's what you get is this. We're getting a lot of, because of the exposure of this.
I'm gonna stay on the exercise argument.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went there. Okay, I'm gonna stay there, specifically weightlifting. And you're right. In order to grow, you've got to tear muscle fibers, right? So the physiology tells us that there's muscle stimulation, and then you've got to tear those fibers. You go to bed, you recover. Okay, but like weightlifting, if you're not careful when doing the exercise, I'll use something as compounded like deadlifts, if you've ever heard of that, where you're going to take a massive amount of weight and lift it up off the floor, primarily with your back, lower back, hamstring action, glutes, but back heavily engaged. If you're not doing that right, man, you have a chance to derail yourself for a very long time. Yeah. And I'm now going to extend that analogy to the classroom. If you're not doing that right, and you're right, man, pain is growth.
Right.
But if you're not doing it right, teaching it right, man, the opportunity, the chances for derailment, for catastrophe, exponentially increase. Absolutely. And some of it, man, you're not walking back from quickly. I mean, I think it is almost that comparable, man, when we get down to the practitioner and what it is they're trying to move.
I agree. And I think you can. And I think that's, again, we need training. You need to be able to talk about it and understand like what you can and can't do with your people, like know your classes. My fear is you rush yourself, that happens. Like you weren't prepared and you kind of hurt yourself. I don't think that means you should never ever go back to the gym again. And that's the fear. Yeah, is that we just get these topics. Like I don't ever want, we had slaves in America. 13th Amendment, let them go.
My thing is my thing is less living in fear, and we do have to be pragmatic. I mean, you do have to be. It's got to be about prevention. Man, prevention is the best medicine.
Right.
So in this case, all right, I'm teaching this very heavy topic. I've met with my administrator about it. And I know this sounds like doing the most. Right. It sounds like Big Brother. But again, we're talking about prevention as the best medicine, being pragmatic in 2025. Here's the heavy lesson. I've met with my administrator. This is what we'll be covering. This is as deep as I'm going. These are the questions that I'm going to be asking. Here's how I plan on facilitating it. Now, administrator 100% on board. I know what's going on, so that when those calls come in, because they're coming in. The calls are coming in. The emails. Someone's feathers are getting ruffled, and you can't control what comment came out of dude's mouth. Now, you can when it's over. There won't be any more of that. You're out of here. But it's already out of the bag at that point. So now the call's coming in. But I've informed my administrator on the front end, right? They have signed off on this topic, this conversation. They're not being blindsided now, and they've got their stock answer ready to go. That, to me, is just being pragmatic in 2025, but still doing the hard work like you're talking about. I just think it can't be, and I don't mean to dismiss any teacher, it just can't be willy-nilly. It can't be something that we're going to try to wing. Man, these things have to be thought through. They have to be clearly explained, and proactively your team is on board with the concepts that are going to be taught that day. Man, that's how serious you have to take it.
I think you're completely right there, and that's why we're doing this episode, because there's some teachers out there who may not, like, they hear about it, but a lot of times it's just like, I don't want to be part of all that news, and sometimes it's just so harrowing to just do it, so they just kind of retreat, and I'm going to do my job. But we can't, like you're saying, we can't teach these things without being aware this is happening. Like you said, you should go to your principal and say, hey, I am teaching this today. This is how I'm doing it.
Because, in case in point is, if you're uncomfortable doing that, it's kind of like, man, if there's any doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah.
I try to live by that kind of creed, man. If there's any doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah.
If you think this might go south, and you haven't brought it to an administrator to vet, to get them on your side, to be proactive, there's a good chance it will. Yeah. So go ahead and have that hard conversation, because if that one's too hard to have, man, imagine what this one's going to be like when that parent is in your inbox.
Right. When when you get that, your phone rings and it is the administrator and they're like, hey, I've gotten 4 calls
in under an hour. Can you be down in my office? Yeah. I'm teaching. It doesn't matter. I'm going to send
we're
you
sending
coverage.
Somebody up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely. And this just to kind of before we get to something teachers could do, something teachers could or students could do. Let's get to. I was kind of thinking about this, like exactly how many. We talked about 10,046, the number of banned books, but like which state's done it. So we're going to do our. Kind of look into our pop catalog pop quiz.
Oh, nice!
You know what this made me think of?
I love this section.
I was sitting there thinking about this, and it made me think of Indiana Jones. I'm gonna do my best Sean Connery voice, where his dad goes, "Well, maybe you should have been reading books instead of burning them."
Nice.
Like that. A little Sean Connery. And I was looking around, and I saw this amazing at pop catalog, this amazing Temple of Doom poster that they have. Beautiful. That's a great.
Yeah, I love that poster.
That's one of the coolest indie pictures. So popcatalog.com. You have original movie posters, video games,
poster, man.
systems, collectibles. You could have almost anything there. Go over to our friends at popcatalog.com and elevate your collection.
Spielberg said, man, the best thing to come out of that movie was that he met his wife.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he liked the sounds of that one, man. He doesn't.
That's crazy.
He doesn't like that one.
I mean, I rewatched it lately.
It's wild.
It's wild, but better than I thought.
Shield monkey brains.
Yeah,
that movie's wild, man.
Yeah, it was.
That guy pulls
awesome.
a beating heart out of a dude's chest.
He really
and
does.
Kids were in the theater, man, in like 1984.
Like, oh,
what?
You call him Dr. Jones. I love Short Round. He's a great character, and now being in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, he's great. Some great actors in there. So our pop catalog pop quiz of the day. All right, so here's a question.
All right.
Which state has the most book bans from 2023 to 2024? Is it A, Tennessee? Is it B, Florida? Is it C, Iowa? Or D, Ohio? Most book bans.
I'm going low-hanging fruit here, man. I'm going low-hanging fruit. I'm not going to overthink this one. Florida.
You are correct.
Yes!
You're like 3 for 3.
I'm hot, man.
You're on fire, bro.
Wow.
It is Florida. So Florida, from 2023 to 2024, they banned 4,561 books, with Iowa coming in second. All right, back from our pop catalog pop quiz. So Florida winning. Great job. You are on fire with the most books banned. So now let's talk about, so we've talked about all of the things that are going on. What are book bans? Some of the players in there and curriculum changes. Why we do it. What can affect students and teachers. So let's do a little call to action. Let's move forward here. So how can we empower educators? We did a little bit of this already. So first way, I think, especially like you said, is one, be aware of this. Just be aware of the controversial topics. Keep an eye on it. Stay abreast of the information. Don't hide from it. I know it stinks just hearing all this negative stuff about education, but stay on top of it. That way you can, understand and communicate with your administrators. You can even, if you really want to, I know sometimes it's scary because it's like, oh, I really need to teach this, but I don't want a bunch of flack on the front end, but you can even send home hey, we're covering, especially for younger groups. I think in high school it's a little different, but if you're covering something in like 6th, 7th grade that could be a little, a little scary, send a letter home.
Back to prevention.
Yeah, prevention. Yeah, send a little letter home and say, hey,
get it on the front end.
And because I think a big part of this too is how publicized it is. You're starting to get more and more. You get the personal opinions of some people are very passionate about the way they feel, especially about certain things. We're talking about LBGT. I've just screwed that up.
LBGTQ.
LBGTQ plus areas, and some people have some very hot opinions there. And if you do have to talk about something like that, now with it being so publicized, individual people feel like, oh, I don't want if my kid hearing that, and I don't think anybody else should. And I feel it's more that they're more willing to be out there and say stuff, to call principals and whatnot, or to talk about their kids, about how you shouldn't be learning that, and the kid comes in and feels something. So just prevention, like do that. Also, when there's banned books and topics, there's, you could have a little bit of a thing called protest pedagogy, where you literally, if it's banned, you're not using it in class, but encourage your students to do outside research, to look things up, to say, hey, these are some of the issues, look into them, talk about it. If you have a question, I'll guide you through it. Ask your parents about it. I think a lot of times some teachers fear parental involvement in the fact that if they know what I'm doing, it can turn negative. But if you say, hey, ask your parents about it, like talk to them about it, then they're feeling included in the learning.
Yeah, and there's two things I wanted to speak to on what you said, and both are as the role of teacher. Teachers are constantly, and rightly so, fighting to be perceived as professionals, right?
Yeah.
So I think, because I do believe teachers are professionals, I think as part of your professional responsibility, you have to stay current on things.
Yes.
Which is what you were talking about earlier. Yeah. I mean, that is part of your professional responsibility. At the very least, be in the know. I know what's going on. I know about this particular bill, which is impacting my job, and here's some of the nuances. I mean, I understand. I'm aware. I'm up to speed on it. I think that's part of your professional responsibility. The other piece is teachers perceived as experts.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I think, man, if you're asking most, teachers want to be perceived
absolutely
as experts. But then when you get into this kind of teaching and learning, this kind of nuance, historical perspective and impacts, it's like, am I the expert?
Am I an expert enough? Yeah.
So, it does become this kind of double-edged sword, if you will, and almost don't want to own the expert label at that point. Hey, Don't shoot the messenger.
Right. They said, teach this, I taught it.
That's right. So we do have to find this kind of balance, man. And I think it goes back to those prevention strategies of getting everybody on board, your administrative team, alerting parents of this very sensitive, hot-button topic that's going to be covered, touched upon, whatever depth you're going into, and here's how I'm going to be facilitating it. But I'm not, in this case, the expert imposing my own subjective beliefs and views on what's happening. I am just the vessel here to communicate this bit of
I'm
teaching
just trying
and learning.
They need to learn this.
That's so easier said than done, dude.
It is.
Because it's still art and science of
murky
teaching.
because you just never know. And all it takes, we all know this, all it takes is one person from the community, one parent to kind of, everybody else might be cool with it. But if they're the vocal minority, right? They're screaming.
And they bark the loudest.
Yeah, they do. And so that's the thing. So I think another thing you do, with your students, another thing we can do is important of fostering critical thinking and open dialogue in the classroom, right? Like be open, like let the students know, hey, we're talking about this subject, right? It's a little tough. Nobody's trying to change your thinking. I'm very open, like it's like, look, I'm not trying to make you think anything differently. I'm giving you all the facts so you can think, so you can make that opinion. And I think that's really important because if the students feel, again, kids have a amazing authenticity detector, right? It's just in their brain. It's help protect them. It's neurological that they have that. And if they know, like, nobody's trying to like make me think, he's just there and giving me this information, they will quickly start to quell any problems. Like parents says something like, no, it's not like that. Or principal says that.
Which is back to my point, man. If you don't have the capacity to run this kind of lesson, and what you say is true, that students have this amazing authenticity detector, bro,
scary.
It's over before it starts.
One a good thing for teachers, this is where lean on your teaching communities. Right, go to the other teachers and be like, "Hey, what do you do here? How
Great
do you do
point.
It?" Yeah, like get together. Don't be over in a corner, nervous and scared about teaching this, and then you go do it and it goes bad. and you're like, oh, and then you have to deal with it all alone. Go to it, make a plan with your group.
This is where strength of PLCs comes in. Your professional learning community. My wife at her school, she has a great PLC team, good bonds, great sharing strategies. But then also, your network, right? Your social media network, your Blue Sky folks, your X folks.
Yeah.
I mean, lean on those people for ideas and proactive, tactics to get in front of these things.
Yeah, use the tools that are out there and talk. That way, if all of you in your school building, let's say you're an English department, you're a history department, if everybody knows what you're doing, everybody kind of has the same little plan there. It's harder to come after all of you.
Yeah,
like if it's 4 teachers doing this, like
strength in numbers.
We as the group of teachers decided this is what we're doing, and as an administrator, a parent's angry. You go, well, our entire English department decided to do it this way. They have over 100 years of teaching experience combined.
Yeah, and that's just being smart, being lockstep with your team, especially you're like a grade level band. So you're teaching it one way, but teacher X is teaching it a totally different way, but same grade level. Man, then you've got, that's grounds for argument, but it's not being done like that over here. In fact, it's a totally different perspective.
Exactly.
Man, then you're going to run into trouble.
And you might find, when you're in that group, you might find a perspective different than yours that you're now engaging with prior to, and
that in theory should sharpen the lesson.
Yes.
Right.
So now
because
you're like,
of this kind of push and pull.
And that allows you to like even have that perspective, maybe change yours a little bit. So it's not as
let's make sure it's less biased because of what I'm hearing right here. Yeah. So those kind of conversations, critical conversations, are key for these kind of lessons.
Yeah. Last couple, it's kind of my pie in the sky idea. I think it's an awesome idea to have like banned book parent clubs. Like, the community engagement, like schools do this. And I know you'd probably get like, you wouldn't probably get all the segments of parents and community people you'd want to actually come hear this. But, outside of school hours, no students involved. Hey, this is a book that's controversial. Let's go through some parts and see how I talk about it and see what you feel, and then get that kind of feedback of what they're feeling. I think that really kind of grows it closer because it makes it less scary. It's like this boogeyman. And finally, stay informed, right? Like, again, we talked about this a little bit. Know some of these groups that are keeping up on this. It's a lot to go through. I get it. The last thing we want is like pour through like what's happening with all this. You're searching the internet, but there's certain groups like Pen America is a group of authors who are against this. The Unite Against Book Bans is a group. The ACLU, all these things you can look, and they inform educators and people of some of these censorship changes. And just knowing is good because now you can be aware of what's happening. And we also have to fight for our profession and fight for what we do. And staying informed is a big part of that. Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting and good thing as you're like, we're kind of going forward. Stay informed. Don't be surprised by any of this. Know that way you can react. And again, prevention. Prevention is the whole thing on this.
Prevention is the best medicine.
So I think what an episode. I mean, that's just it's a lot. It's so much. We could talk about this for hours upon hours.
It's heavy, but it's important. It's an issue that's not going away, in anytime soon. So the more practical strategies, the better understanding, that we all have. I mean, all stakeholders on what's really happening. And I mean, really, like, what's the truth behind a lot of these accusations that are just being spewed from both sides? What's really going on in the classroom? How are kids really being affected by this?
Right.
How are they really embracing or not embracing any and all of this? I think is very relevant. All in all, man, and I'm going to go back to your kind of historical perspective. This is nothing new, right? It's a, interesting, albeit chaotic time.
Yep.
But, I still love that Chinese philosophy, man, on danger. Danger is chaos meets opportunity. So there's opportunity in here, man. There just is. And we have to keep having these kind of conversations, keep sifting through that rubble at times, looking for these pieces of opportunity, man, that are going to change things.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that quote. And danger is my middle name. And a little time to go out there. But I'm tired from thinking about it because it is so much. Like, it just kind of wears me out. But I'm also invigorated by this because think about the force for good that educators, administrators, and parents can be when they unite to benefit, frankly, our most precious resource, which is students. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing here is like all of us together getting together and making sure that we're, doing this the right way So, thank you everybody for joining us here on Educational Warfare. Banning books and limiting curriculum has been a battle, like we talked about. It's been waged for many years, and one that we're going to keep fighting against. And here on Educational Warfare, we will continue to discuss, debate, and bring that radical candor we talk about and the truth to the issue. So, send us your stories of students, strategies to deal with this, experiences with this. And again, if you just want to vent about it and tell us how you feel, email us at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. And again, follow us on X at EDUwarfare, Blue Sky at drlauer.bskysocial, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Educational Warfare, to catch all of our videos, shorts, and anything else we may do. So thank you to our team, Tom Roof and Matt Paff. And for Dr. Ryan Jackson, I'm Dr. Jordan Lauer, saying thank you for watching and listening, and thank you for being a part of the fight.